Video games are an incredible medium. The stories they can tell, the incredible potential for unique gameplay mechanics, the fun you can have in single and multiplayer. And yet, there are still things they do which we wish they didn't. These are the things that cause an audible groan when you come across them, or make you ask yourself why video games haven't evolved past including said frustrating feature or misleading mechanic. While some games feel slick as hell, even the best experiences can sometimes be ruined by those little things that honestly, video games just need to stop doing. This list was in part inspired by a Reddit thread from user Frogsplosion, which is a delightful username, as well as my own ranty frustrations with video games, so I hope you buckled in. Let's get into it. I'm Jess, and here are 10 things video games do that we never want to see again. Number 10. NPCs who don't keep pace with you. This one has definitely been discussed in gaming circles before, but it absolutely deserves a slot on this list. There's nothing more annoying than when a game asks you to follow an NPC, but they run faster than your walk speed, but slower than your run speed. I honestly don't know how this happens in game development, a realm I admit is absolute wizardry and awe-inspiring, but still. This one used to be especially bad in games that are at least a decade old, but I still stumble upon it occasionally in newer games. You're beckoned after an NPC who runs off ahead, but at a slower run than your hero protagonist run, so then you have to do that weird run-walk thing to get up to where they are. Not to mention if they're telling some story during said walk or run that requires you to be nearby, then if you stray too far, they'll stop talking, and once you catch up, they begin the sentence all over again. That little extra annoyance could honestly probably be its own entry, but we're just gonna throw it into this one because we have a lot to get through. Number 9. Brutal load times in brutally hard games. Of course, it's not always possible for a game to control its load times, but there's usually a correlation between games where your time to death is less than 2 minutes and games with a really quick respawn. I'm talking about games like Super Meat Boy, Hotline Miami, and Celeste. You'll be dying a lot and very quickly, but you'll come back to life almost immediately so it doesn't break the pace. Then we have the Jedi Fallen Orders of the world, as well as any game that's trying its best to run on a less than optimal console or PC. Nobody wants to do their best to navigate an especially tricky section, fail, and then sit through minutes of load screens only to do it all again in a couple minutes time. The answer to this one might just be that it's an extra pressure to get good, but it's still a really fast way to turn a fun time into a decidedly not fun time. Number 8. NPCs who nag you to hurry up. RPGs in particular are a fantastic playground to be explored as quickly or as slowly as you like, in theory. In practice, there always seems to be a Na'vi from Ocarina of Time or Dutch from Red Dead Redemption 2 telling you to get a wriggle on, even though the only reason I'm taking so long is to get loot for your freaking camp, Dutch. Jeez. This one is another head scratcher from the development side. I don't know if these games are concerned that we're just lost or had a sudden bout of completely forgetting why we were there or what we were supposed to be doing, but being shouted at to hurry up and move on is a pain. This goes doubly for when the urgency is entirely false and we actually have all the time in the world. Culprits of this particular entry also include Assassin's Creed titles, the Metro games, and Supreme Commander. If I do actually need to get a move on because the fuzz are about to show up or a bomb is going off, then feel free to let me know. In any other case, let us enjoy our open world playgrounds. I'll get back to the thing you asked me to do once I've opened every drawer and broken every barrel in this joint. Number 7. Areas becoming inaccessible after progress. This is a huge problem in games that have collectibles but follow a linear through line. Once you enter a pathway that takes you through to a new area, sometimes there's no going back. I still think about the huge narrative moment that I personally missed out on in the last chapter of Life is Strange during the storm. I accidentally went under some debris, and instead of taking me to what I thought was an area I could completely return from whenever I wanted to do all the things behind me, nope, new area. Everything's gone. Too bad. Okay, so maybe this isn't a huge problem, but if you are also a completionist, you know the struggles of trying to go the wrong way first to make sure you find every little thing before moving forward. Big games with set pieces like Mass Effect do this too. You can easily miss a gun or a great upgrade if you don't realize that pressing toward that objective marker will throw you into a cutscene and then lock that door up tight behind you. Throw up a warning sign so we know we're leaving the previous area at least. Knowing there was a medkit that you intended to grab but instead you got thrown into the next arena is not a good feeling. Number 6. Forced walking and tailing missions. I know why this one happens. The devs have inserted an exposition dump in the form of an NPC, and he has a hell of a lot to get through before we stroll into town or to the cave or whatever we're doing. But there are few things as painful as being forced to walk in a game. I'm looking at you, Metro, Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Gears of War 2 comms chat sections. Sometimes you don't even need an NPC to slow you down. Maybe your character is having a moment, or maybe they're tailing someone. I've thrown the latter in with this entry because the annoyance comes from the same place. If I'm the Dragonborn or the hero Kvatch, I don't see why I'm crouched here behind this pillar and creeping down the road trying to see where some dude spends his seedy afternoons. Yakuza spin-off Judgment is a great example of this. The game is an absolute blast, and combat is chaotic, frenetic, and exciting. Then there's the tailing missions. Here you'll need to hurry on after some dummy who frequently changes direction, suspiciously looks behind him even though he doesn't know you're there, and stands still, staring straight at you only to piss bolt in the other direction, for which you'll get a notification that you're, quote, losing the target. Lost Judgment, the sequel, does have a fairly entertaining interaction that lets you act casual with the press of a button, but I still don't want video games to do this anymore. Number 5, weapon durability. I know this one's going to be pretty divisive, but I'm proposing that there are very few situations where breakable weapons are improving a video game. That doesn't mean it doesn't make sense for certain games, but the frustration of having to dip into town in Diablo 2 to repair your bloodied and mildly tarnished sword after just a few dungeons, or needing to chop down a tree in a survival crafting game to make a new axe because the one you crafted 2 days ago snapped, is not great. I know coming at video games for a lack of realism is a fool's errand, but weapons crafted with any level of skill really shouldn't be breaking after a few days. Or weeks or months for that matter, actually. Unless you're crafting this stuff in a game where your tools and skill level is horrible, which is pretty excusable, there's no explaining it. Not to mention, it's just a painful mechanic. I get that games like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild do this to keep you on your toes and not relying on one super weapon, but honestly, give me the super weapon. As commenters on Reddit mentioned, there are often options to mod this out if you happen to play on PC, so if it bugs you, check that out. Number 4. That's not what I meant. Some games tell you exactly what your character is going to say in a dialogue interaction before you say it, but a lot of them, like the Mass Effect or later Fallout games, will shorthand it for the dialogue wheel, and then you'll hear your protagonist say the extended version. This is all well and good for the most part, and it makes conversations more entertaining when Shepard isn't just reading out the thing you already read for yourself, but it doesn't always go to plan. While I'm sure that creating the shorthand versions of these dialogue options is a tricky art, it's a little frustrating when the character doesn't say at all what you intended for them to when you picked that option. This comes up a lot in Dragon Age games too. What you may have intended to come off as a light-hearted joke is delivered smarmy and cruel. Or perhaps you're playing The Witcher 3 and chose to shove someone aside, and you punch them so they fall to the ground and break their leg. Intention accomplished, I guess? LA Noire is infamous for having your protagonist fly off the handle when all you did was press X to doubt. I don't know what the solution is for this one, and it's so funny we might just let it be. Just make sure you save before any pivotal conversations in case you inadvertently punch or make out with someone you didn't mean to. Number 3, unskippable cutscenes. This entry is dedicated to 3 slightly different but equally irritating instances of unskippable cutscenes. The first is the classic unskippable cutscene. Story sections are great, but they're not for everybody. Not only that, but maybe you played the game a bunch of times before, or it crashed and you needed to boot it up again. In all of those occasions, you don't need to be forced to sit through an enormously long cutscene that you will incidentally unintentionally learn the words to. The second irritating use of unskippable cutscenes is when a game is front-loaded with 45 minutes or so of just constant cutscenes without hitting a minute of actual gameplay. If you're super into the backstory, you probably wouldn't even notice. If not, you're probably pretty over sitting through the almost movie and unlikely to be a fan of the Yakuza games or anything Hideo Kojima has ever made. But I would argue there's one kind of unskippable cutscene that's worse than any other, and that's the ones right before a really tricky boss fight. You already feel like crap having lost to a boss, especially if your last manual save or autosave threw you back a little ways. So the last thing you need is to have to sit through the same cutscene you watched before being defeated. We've all got specific voice lines in our heads that trigger at the beginning of a particularly tricky boss encounter that we had to do over and over. If you can think of yours, please let me know what it is down in that comment section. Everything should be skippable, at least once the player is sat through it once, and especially pre-boss cutscenes. Number 2. Single player games that don't pause. One of the bad things about playing multiplayer games is that you're on everybody else's time, and the server's time, and a modicum of coordination and attention is pretty much always required. That's what's great about playing single player games. You can play when you want and pause when you want. Of course, some instances you can't do that. Even though you're the only real person there, you still cannot pause the game at all. For some reason, games like Valheim, Dark Souls, and Diablo 2 Resurrected don't pause when you're in the menu screen, which can in some cases have to do with the fact that you're on a server, but it is an annoyance. In each of those games, you can just go to a safe area or an area you hope is safe, and run off to do whatever you need to do, hoping a baddie doesn't spawn and start stabbing you. The beauty of single player games should be that you can run off and answer the telephone safely without having to worry about a single skeleton spawning and just slowly hacking away your protagonist until you're dead. Number 1. Grab ladders. Every ladder in a video game should be slide downable. Every protagonist should be able to quickly swap what side of the ladder they are on if they're on the wrong side, and every ladder should feature a firm grab to the main character so I don't accidentally jump down the huge hole in the ground to my death instead of taking the ladder. If I was a politician, I think that'd be my platform. Ladders on the ground don't easily grab to your protagonist in Death Stranding, which is a huge problem in a game where traversal is already hard. Our Days Gone protagonist can't slide down ladders, and there's nothing we need less when trying to loot a village while under suspicion in an Assassin's Creed game than not being able to get on a ladder promptly. This isn't even a problem that's been fixed in very recent games. In Back 4 Blood, the game doesn't prompt you with a grab button, so look forward to an accidental fall or two leading to a significant gouge out of your health bar at best, and a full-on knockout at worst. The combo of bad ladder design and brutal fall damage is a classic video game no-no that we are absolutely done with seeing. And that's our list, which was surprisingly hard to get down to just 10 things, so do let me know down in that comment box if you have any video game annoyances that you want to get off your chest. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm @JessMcDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more great content.